Our final speaker for this morning is Al Tickell, the founder and director of Julie's Bicycle. Al's going to talk to us about Julie's Bicycle's efforts to green the music, arts, and culture sectors.
Now for something completely different. Julie's Bicycle is it's a company that's been around for 5 years, and our aim is to make environmental sustainability, particularly the tackling of our carbon, intrinsic to the business, the ethics, and indeed the art of the industry. We're a very small team working at quite significant scale, and we've grown incrementally over 5 years, and I think that's been a very interesting journey for us. We started without knowing where we were going, as is the case with all very intuitive and creative sectors. But I did recognise right from the outset that there is an extraordinary, internally transformative role that the experience of art has with us all. John describes it as music as being the soundtrack to our lives. While this is completely different from all the other speakers, I think this is absolutely critical for dealing with the problems that we face today, and art keeps on popping up all the way through the morning. We've had references to it. So I started knowing actually that while we had this extraordinary asset, we needed to use it incredibly well. And that did not mean setting somebody up on top of a stage and lecturing a large audience on the dangers of climate change. It actually meant we had to really look into our own world and take responsibility. We also started with a huge support of music industry executives, and I think that's been absolutely critical. We're now working right across the creative sector, and at every stage of that, we've had 100% support from very senior leaders. So something very interesting is happening. These are the people responsible for putting on the big gigs, the Glastonburys and the Live Earth events, but they really wanted to do something different. I think that it made us very prey to the idea that we were an instrument for a campaign. We were the voice of the artist, and of course we are quite the opposite. We've always had an instinctive suspicion of the idea that if you are an artist and you proclaim on the role of art, you therefore have dispatched your responsibility and your duties towards an issue of broad social concern. It is much more complex than that. It has to carry far more integrity. We're right in the spotlight of it, and therefore much more needed to be done. So, using Casper's exhortation, we had to look to ourselves, and that is what we did. The first thing we did was to shrink the music industry to the size of a carbon footprint. Not very sexy, but it did reduce it down to a manageable size. It legitimated a relationship that the arts and culture had with science, and it also gave us a roadmap for where to go next. And since that time, we have systematically used that as a model, used the scientific research to tell us what to do, and within that, to experiment and to innovate, and to pull in that great asset that we have in spades, which is, of course, creativity. And one of the best things that we've discovered is that the creative output, the poem, the music, the play, the sculpting, was actually only a part of the story. The really interesting creativity sits behind all of those great pieces of work. And if we could gather and galvanize that creativity, we were at that point, which Kelly so beautifully talked about at the beginning, around shared responsibility, collaboration, really being an ecosystem, a creative ecosystem that was all about organisms. And that is exactly what has happened. The creativity that goes into the making of a show, into the putting on of a festival, into understanding the audience's experience, so that the art can speak out with integrity is absolutely critical. It also means that you deal with every single person. And of course, the other point that Kelly made is that this is all about people. Fundamentally, this problem is all about people. It's people as individuals, and it's the relationships that we have with each other. And Julie's Bicycle, the company, has remained extremely small, but we have worked with literally hundreds and hundreds of people, communities of peers working together, committed to doing something, to making a difference. So while we can stay small, I do think that we can have an extraordinary reach. we've also managed to establish once and for all in a sector, the cultural sector, which prides itself on a notion, a very unclear notion of moral authority, that actually environmental sustainability is critical to its business model. It is a moral issue, and it is actually what's going to form our future in every single way. And as a consequence of that, we've had an absolute outpouring. Julie's Bicycle is now measuring with over 1,000 organisations. We're working in many different countries, and we're working all over the UK in many different sectors, both subsidised and indeed commercial. To the extent, and Patrick's points about policy, to the extent now that actually the Arts Council England very recently did something which was an international first, which was to make environmental measurement, reporting, policy and action planning a criterion of getting funding from them. Now, that happened a few months ago, and it's a point about voluntary compliancy that really has made a difference, and it's now being taken and looked at as a strategic priority for the International Federation of Arts organisations. So that's taking it immediately to scale. The other lovely thing that's happened is, of course, as a consequence of this, the artists, those whose responsibility it is to make things, have really started to do things and make things very differently. So by not going too close to the art, actually there's been a wonderful flowering of creative and artistic thought around this issue, and not before time. This is the very stuff of arts and culture. I just wanted to finally sort of finish on the importance, I think, of the arts and culture in imagining for us some of these futures that we've seen before us this morning in complex, creative and interesting ways, and in ways that all of us in this room, and to a scale way beyond the confines of King's Place, will really need to be engaging with in the future. There's been much talk about citizenship around the role of culture, and it's interesting if we look at what culture actually encapsulates, and around the importance of creating a future that we can all share, that's one based on, not on dystopia, but on hope. And I think that our sector, the arts and cultural sector, has really got a very important part to play in that story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.